not quitting today. I don't believe, and I just talked to the president, I don't think I'm being fired today. This is really, really hard work, running the United States of America. I don't run it. I was not sent into or brought in to control him, and I can guarantee to you that he is now presented with options, well thought out options. When members of Congress say things that are unfair or critical, the president has a right to defend himself. You guys with the cameras always catch me when I'm thinking hard, and it looks like I'm frustrated and mad. One of his frustrations is you. I will give you the benefit of the doubt, maybe develop some better sources.
It's hard work. That from President Trump's chief of staff, who made no bones about it today, saying his current role is the toughest job he's ever had, but he's up for the challenge and is not going anywhere. General John Kelly making a surprise appearance before the press today for the first time since he took the job at the White House, answering important policy questions while also peeling back the curtain a bit about working there.
It was a surprise move in the daily briefing. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly meeting the White House press corps on the record for the first time to say reports of his demise are greatly exaggerated.
I'm not quitting today. I don't believe, and I just talked to the president, I don't think I'm being fired today. And I am not so frustrated in this job that I'm thinking of leaving.
Kelly, long known in military circles as a no BS straight shooter, acknowledged that Chief of Staff is the hardest job he has ever had, but disputed the notion that certain aspects of it are getting to him.
Are you frustrated?
No, I'm not frustrated. This is really, really hard work, running the United States of America. I don't run it, but I'm working for someone who is dedicated to serving the country. I don't mean any criticism to Mr. Trump's predecessors, but there was an awful lot of things that were, in my view, kicked down the road that have come home to roost pretty much right now that have to be dealt with.
Kelly did admit to being frustrated by news reports he said had little or no basis in reality and had some advice for certain members of the media.
Maybe develop some better sources.
The White House went out of its way today to indicate Kelly is safe in his job. At an event to officially nominate Kelly's Deputy Chief of Staff, Kirstjen Nielsen, as the new DHS Secretary, President Trump gave Kelly a shout-out and singled him out for high praise.
We are deeply fortunate that he is now here at the White House as our Chief of Staff. Do you agree with that, Kirstjen?
Nielsen, who was also Kelly's Chief of Staff at DHS, would become the 6th Secretary and also the first former staffer to lead the department.
I share the President's profound commitment to the security of our country.
White House Chief of Staff John Kelly surprising in the briefing room today and arguably charming reporters there in what turned out to be a very substantive, engaging 23 minutes of time in the briefing room taking questions. This is all of these stories about what he really thinks and how he's doing his job behind the scenes have been popping up all over the place based on anonymous sources. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and Michael Crowley, senior correspondent for Politico. Steve, some people looked at that and said that was a tour de force.
Yeah, more John Kelly, please. Look, he's a smart, thoughtful, patriotic guy. He explains the White House position very well. I thought he was able to take some shots at the media without doing it in quite the acerbic way that we're used to from the president. But it's a good position for the White House to be in. I think he helps the president recover from these tweets that the president sent, which were much more aggressive, much more antagonistic, suggested pulling licenses and even censoring because he doesn't like the content of these things. General Kelly did it with a smile, and I think did it much more effectively.
I mean, he did say that the tweets are not a problem for him, or it doesn't make his job tougher. I think that was one of the elements that the reporters in the room thought maybe that's interesting to hear him say. Here's a question by John Roberts about frustration, whether Kelly is frustrated.
I don't mean any criticism to Mr. Trump's predecessors, but there was an awful lot of things that were, in my view, kicked down the road that have come home to roost pretty much right now that have to be dealt with.
Are you frustrated?
No, I'm not frustrated. This is hard work, John. And my only frustration, with all due respect to everyone in the room, is when I come to work in the morning and read about things I allegedly said or things that Mr. Trump allegedly said or people who were going to be fired or whatever, and it's just not true.
I mean, Molly, I don't know how many stories I've read or seen that had anonymous sources describing Kelly on his way out the door.
Right. It was actually very frustrating for me when he said that he wasn't quitting today, and the room erupted in laughter, as if it were really funny that they go and they write all these stories every few days about how he's quitting and how they have all the best sources that he's quitting. And when he denies it, they act like it's really funny. It's not funny to have so many stories based on unreliable, anonymous sources, and the public can't check these sources. I mean, I saw that earlier in the show that you had someone from a different outlet saying, no, really, trust us. Our sources are good. Well, there's no way to trust when they contradict information that's on the record, and there's no way to check and hold them accountable. And I think it's really a huge threat. In addition to the external threats to freedom of the press, there's the internal threat of how the media are handling their jobs and how they're losing their standards and how they're breaking that social contract. They get a lot of perks and privileges as part of this First Amendment agreement, and they are not living up to those standards.
What did you think of John Kelly in the briefing room?
Well, I thought he was a nice breath of fresh air in there. It's usually antagonistic, and even that was somewhat antagonistic, but with a kind of a lighter tone to it. So strategic to bring him out in that sense. I also think that there is a narrative, which the White House obviously disputes, that it's chaos and everyone's on the brink of quitting and they're just barely containing Trump and all his wildest impulses. And Kelly comes out, and he's a guy with natural, unforced authority, military man, who also has kind of, it turns out, sort of a light touch and a sense of humor. And I think that it projects an image, which I have to say, in defense of my colleagues in the press, I'm not sure it is an accurate image. I mean, not all these stories may be right, but a lot of the anonymously sourced stories that have come out of this administration have been borne out. And the mere fact that people are talking so freely and critically about the president, the way the White House is being run, tells you something. Having said that, it does present a face of kind of calm, quiet authority that I think is useful for the White House in trying to bat back that narrative.
Well, I mean, I tell you, that pushback seemed pretty effective when he turned and said, maybe you need better sources.
Yeah, well, anytime he wants to call me, I'm here. I'm willing to talk to you about the best source you can have. Yeah, look, I mean, I think if you look at it from the perspective of the White House, they're making this argument. They want to suggest that nothing's believable. None of the media reports are believable. It's just not true. And the White House also plays a role in these anonymous sources, it must be said. I mean, the White House hosts background briefings all the time in which reporters who call in or are present for the briefings are told, you can quote us as senior administration officials, what have you. That is one of the way the White House gets its word out, and it's done on a pretty regular, probably almost daily basis.
But the standard isn't that a lot of the stories are true or a lot of them check out. The standard when you're in the truth-telling business is that all of your stories need to check out. And there have been so many stories about people who are leaving, who don't leave, and it becomes very difficult. How does a general reader or viewer know who to trust and who not to trust when so many of the stories turn out not to be true?
But here's the question. I mean, after today, how many of these stories that have been written or done will go back and say, well, we were dead wrong when we said that he was frustrated or he's leaving or that XYZ?
Right.
How many do you think?
But it may not be. But look, it may not be wrong, right? I mean, it may be that General Kelly has been frustrated. I think General Kelly has been frustrated.
But you just
I've
said he
talked
wasn't.
to people who think that General Kelly has been frustrated.
I know, but it's him.
So then, what are we
Is he
just
lying?
Are we to just assume that everybody in the federal government is telling the truth about when they make a comment?
Is he?
Look, I don't want to challenge General Kelly's integrity. I've talked to people who have worked with him who said that he's frustrated.
And I think he
and
did slip
it's
at the
important,
beginning.
though. It's important to challenge what you hear from the podium sometimes. I did it all the time.
Of course.
But for instance, he did say he was frustrated. He said he was frustrated by waking up every day and seeing false stories in the media. So he did admit that he was frustrated. And maybe when you hear reports that he's frustrated, that people are misinterpreting.
Do you think he's never frustrated by what's happening in the White House?
No, I think that what we need
come
to do
on.
is have sources who can be held accountable. If he is not telling the truth here, this can come out.
But you have to challenge government. You have to challenge official government sources. I mean, we did that all the time. Think about, we can't take at face value what Jay Carney said when he was briefing on Benghazi.
Of course,
but
when you have the anonymous sources who are not going to go on the record, and then you have the chief of staff saying what he says on the record.
It should matter, and it should carry more. It should carry more weight when he says it on the record. It doesn't mean that everything that's said on the record is true.
All right. The flip side, Molly, is that the president is tweeting, and he has continued to do this, saying network news has become so partisan, distorted, and fake that licenses must be challenged, and if appropriate, revoked, not fair to public. The fake news is going all out in order to demean and denigrate such hatred. What about that?
Right. And I mean, this is the flip side to what we're talking about. There are all sorts of ways to demand accountability from the press that do not involve calls for government action. When Trump is talking about the proliferation of fake news, the over-reliance on anonymous sources, he's on strong ground. When he starts calling for government action, he's on less strong ground. Of course, people also overreact as if there's some constitutional right to bandwidth or spectrum, which is not, it's a little bit of an overreaction to that. But he has a strong case to be made that the media have not been handling their vocations very well. He oversteps when he calls for government action.
This is Howie Kurtz. It'll be a whole show, I guarantee you, this weekend. But I want to turn real quickly to the executive order, also news today on health care. Take a listen.
This is going to be something that millions and millions of people will be signing up for, and they're going to be very happy. This will be great health care.
It is a sabotage of the Affordable Care Act, and quite frankly, a real disservice to the American people, many of whom voted for him.
This has long been part of our strategy to try and help Americans get access to more affordable health care, to bring more choice and competition to the marketplace and lower premiums. So it's in perfect keeping with what we've been planning all along.
And just to go over some bullet points here quickly, it directs the Secretary of Labor to consider allowing small businesses to form association health plans, AHPs, which could allow more consumers to buy health insurance across state lines. The Department of Treasury, Labor, and HHS to consider giving people more access to short-term limited duration insurance. And it directs Treasury, Labor, and HHS to consider changes to health reimbursement arrangements, HRAs, to pay for employees' medical needs. It's essentially around the edges of what they haven't been able to do legislatively.
Exactly. I mean, this is a response to what has been one of the great frustrations of Trump's presidency, is that they haven't been able to repeal and replace Obamacare. The Congress just can't get it done. So Trump, like many other presidents before him, is resorting to what executive power he has to, at a minimum, send a signal that he's doing something. I mean, it's a little bit of an offering for his political base to say, look, I'm trying here even if I can't get the Congress. What supporters of Obamacare might suggest is that he's actually trying to precipitate a crisis, trying to undermine the existing system to create a crisis that will then force Congress and maybe push it over the brink to take action. I mean, that is a possible scenario.
And they are claiming that they'll bring it up legislatively in the new year.